what if everything you know about creation started in the wrong place? Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 declares that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Millions of believers accept this as the absolute starting point of all existence. But ancient Sumerian tablets discovered in the ruins of Mesopotamia tell a different story, one that predates the Hebrew Bible by more than 1,000 years. These clay fragments whisper of a time before creation itself, a moment so ancient that even the name of God had not yet been spoken. Scholars who translate these weathered inscriptions describe something that challenges the very foundation of biblical timeline. Before the first divine word echoed through the void, there existed a vibration, a cosmic frequency pulsing through absolute nothingness. The Sumerians documented this not as mythology, but as sacred history, as if they possessed knowledge that later civilizations deliberately buried beneath layers of theological revision. The tablets speak of Apsu, representing the sweet primordial waters, and Tiamat, embodying the chaotic salt depths of the cosmic abyss. These were not deities who commanded existence into being through sovereign decree. Instead, they generated reality from within themselves, expelling the universe as a mother births a child, violently, mysteriously, irreversibly. This is not mere poetic metaphor. This is a radically different cosmological model that positions creation not as an act of will, but as an organic emergence from something that already existed. If these ancient scribes recorded truth, then the void described in Genesis 1:2 was never truly empty. Something ancient and powerful was already moving, breathing, vibrating in that darkness before God spoke light into existence. The implications shake the foundations of everything Western theology teaches about origins. Most people assume the Bible represents the oldest account of how everything began, but archaeological evidence proves otherwise. The Sumerian creation tablets were being inscribed on clay, while the Hebrew people were still centuries away from existing as a distinct nation. These weren't primitive myths created by ignorant desert wanderers. The Sumerians possessed sophisticated astronomy, mathematics, and written language long before Abraham walked out of Ur. Their creation accounts display a complexity that suggests either advanced theological philosophy or the recording of actual events witnessed by someone or something beyond normal human perception. When we examine the Hebrew word used in Genesis for God, we find Elohim, a plural noun consistently translated in singular form as if one being is being described. Yet the word itself means gods, multiple divine entities, a council rather than a solitary creator. The Sumerian tablets make no attempt to hide this multiplicity. They openly describe the Anunnaki, a divine assembly that descended from the heavens to establish order upon the earth. The question becomes unavoidable. Are we reading about the same events filtered through different cultural lenses, or did later biblical editors deliberately obscure an older, more complex truth about plural divine origins? In the Sumerian narrative, creation unfolds through three distinct movements. First, the cosmic vibration establishes duality, separating sky from earth, light from shadow, order from chaos. Second, the divine assembly emerges from this duality, taking form and personality and purpose. Third, these entities begin the work of shaping the material realm according to mysterious intentions that the tablets describe, but never fully explain. Notice how this pattern appears again in Genesis. The Spirit hovers over waters, God speaks separation into existence, and then in chapter 1 verse 26, God says, "Let us make man in our image," using plural pronouns that theologians have struggled to explain for millennia. Who is the us? Who shares the divine image? Traditional Christianity points to the Trinity, but that doctrine was formalized centuries after Genesis was written. The ancient Hebrews who first heard these words had no concept of three persons in one Godhead. They would have heard those plural words and understood them exactly as written: multiple divine beings participating in creation. This is where the Sumerian tablets become dangerously illuminating. They describe exactly such a scenario: a council of powerful entities working together, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension, to forge the world and everything in it. If this is true, If creation emerged not from one mind but from many, then every theological system built on divine simplicity collapses. The nature of God, the character of heaven, the very structure of spiritual authority, all of it requires fundamental reconsideration. But here is what makes this discovery even more unsettling. The Sumerian perspective suggests that creation was not an act of perfect love, but rather a response to cosmic conflict, a solution to divine problems, a necessary step in a larger celestial drama that was already unfolding before Earth existed. The tablets indicate that the universe as we know it emerged from tension, from disagreement among the divine council about how to proceed. Some ancient voices wanted one thing, other voices demanded another, and the compromise was this reality, our reality, a realm that bears the marks of that original conflict in its very structure. In this understanding, the biblical silence about what existed before Genesis becomes deafening. What was God doing before creation? Where did God exist? Was God alone, or were there others? Genesis offers no answers, as if a curtain has been pulled across the stage, hiding the prelude from the audience. But the Sumerian tablets refuse that silence. They pull back the veil and reveal a cosmos that was never empty, never still, never waiting for a single voice to break the silence. Something was already there, already moving, already churning with purpose and power and presence. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. Subscribe now, because what we are about to uncover will challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical origins. The ancient evidence is overwhelming, and it has been hiding in plain sight for over a century. Let me show you what they never taught in Sunday school. Chapter 2. When Gods Walked as Many. Let me ask you something simple. When the Bible says God created the heavens and the earth, which God is it talking about? Most believers never pause to consider that question because the answer seems obvious. But the Hebrew text of Genesis preserves a mystery that translators have worked hard to smooth over. The word Elohim appears more than 2,000 times in the Old Testament, and in every instance, it is grammatically plural. Genesis 1:1 should literally read, "In the beginning, God's created the heavens and the earth." Not God's singular, but God's plural. Theologians explain this as the majestic plural, a literary device showing respect. But ancient Hebrew contains actual examples of majestic plural, and Elohim does not follow that pattern. It behaves like a true plural, multiple subjects taking collective action. The Sumerian tablets never bothered with theological cover stories. They simply state the facts as their culture understood them. The Anunnaki, divine beings from the heavens, descended to earth and began the work of organizing chaos into cosmos. These were not abstract forces or poetic metaphors. The tablets describe them with names, personalities, responsibilities, and relationships. Anu represented supreme authority, the distant sky father. Enlil carried executive power, enforcing divine decisions and maintaining cosmic order. Enki embodied wisdom and creativity, the problem solver who often bent rules to achieve necessary outcomes. These three formed the core of divine administration. But they were not alone. The tablets mention 50 divine council members, sometimes more, each with specific roles in managing the spiritual and physical operations of creation. The parallels to biblical angelology are striking. Christianity describes archangels, principalities, powers, thrones, and dominions, an elaborate hierarchy of spiritual beings executing the will of God. Except the Bible never quite explains where these beings came from, when they were created, or how their authority structure functions. The Sumerian records suggest an answer that religious authorities have spent millennia trying to suppress. These were not created servants of one supreme God. They were the gods, plural, the divine council that predates the monotheistic revolution of Hebrew theology. Here is where the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. When Genesis 1:26 records God saying, "Let us make man in our image," the plural pronouns are not accidental. The Hebrew grammar forces plurality. The verb create that follows is singular, suggesting one entity acting, but the pronouns remain stubbornly plural throughout the verse. It is as if the text is trying to tell us something that later theology desperately wants to hide. Someone or several someones participated in human creation. The Sumerian tablets openly describe this exact scenario. The Anunnaki Council gathered to address a pressing problem. The work of maintaining the earth and extracting its resources had become too burdensome for divine beings. They needed workers, servants, a created workforce to handle the physical labor that the gods found beneath their dignity. The decision was made. A new creature would be formed, something between the divine and the animal, intelligent enough to understand commands, but limited enough to never threaten divine authority. Sound familiar? This is not ancient mythology. This is a coherent explanation for why human beings occupy such a strange position in the cosmic hierarchy, advanced beyond all animals yet constantly aware of our limitations, our mortality, our distance from whatever divine reality might exist. The biblical account in Genesis 2 describes God forming man from dust and breathing life into his nostrils. The Sumerian version describes Enki directing the creation of humans by mixing clay from the earth with the blood of a slaughtered god. Both versions involve earth and divine essence. Both result in a creature that bears divine image but remains fundamentally mortal. Both place humanity in a subordinate position, created to serve higher purposes we do not fully understand. The difference is that the Sumerian account explains why we are this way. We were designed for service, engineered with just enough divine spark to be useful but not enough to be dangerous. Or so the divine council thought. But then something unexpected happened. The tablets describe the humans multiplying beyond original projections, spreading across the earth, beginning to develop their own culture, their own knowledge, their own power. Genesis 6 describes something similar, humanity becoming numerous and mighty, producing offspring that troubled the heavens. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took wives from among them. Again, plural divine beings again interacting with humanity in ways that blur the boundaries between heaven and earth. The Sumerian tablets speak of the same phenomenon, divine beings descending to mate with human women, producing hybrid offspring with extraordinary abilities. These were not demons or fallen angels in the later Christian sense. These were members of the divine council exercising privileges they believed were theirs by right, and the results terrified the higher authorities. Why? Because hybrid offspring meant that humanity was no longer a controlled experiment. The bloodlines were being contaminated or enhanced, depending on your perspective, with divine genetics that should have remained separate. The creatures designed to serve were becoming something else, something that could potentially challenge the very gods who made them. This brings us to a question that every honest biblical scholar must confront. If the Anunnaki and the Elohim are describing the same divine council, then who exactly are we worshipping? When Christians pray to God, are they addressing the supreme being above all, or are they calling out to one member of an ancient council, perhaps the one who won a power struggle and eliminated rivals from the official record? The prophet Daniel describes the Ancient of Days presiding over a divine court, thousands upon thousands attending him. Psalm 82 depicts God standing in the divine assembly, judging among the gods themselves. These are not metaphors. These are glimpses of something the biblical editors could not completely erase. Evidence of a plural divine reality that monotheism tried to replace with singular worship. If you are a believer, this should not destroy your faith. It should deepen it, because if the divine reality is more complex than we were told, if heaven operates through councils and hierarchies and competing authorities, then our prayers matter more, not less. We are not shouting into the void hoping one distant God notices. We are participants in a cosmic drama where multiple powers observe, influence, and respond to human activity. The ancient Sumerians understood this. They did not worship one god and ignore the rest. They acknowledged the council and sought favor with various members depending on their needs. Was this primitive polytheism or sophisticated theology? Perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the issue is not how many divine beings exist, but which one deserves ultimate loyalty. And if the biblical God is calling us to exclusive worship despite the existence of other powers, that makes the biblical message more radical, not less. Yahweh is not claiming to be the only spiritual entity. Yahweh is claiming to be the only one worthy of worship, the only one whose character and purposes deserve complete human allegiance. That is a very different claim, and it explains why the biblical text contains so many echoes of divine plurality, even while demanding singular devotion. Like this video if this perspective is opening your eyes to something the church never explained. Comment below with your thoughts, because this conversation is just beginning. What comes next will reveal why the divine council went to war and why that ancient conflict still shapes our world today. Chapter 3. The war heaven tried to forget. What if I told you that before humanity took its first breath, the heavens were already soaked in blood? Scripture teaches that God is eternal, unchanging, perfect in peace and harmony. But ancient texts from Mesopotamia preserve a very different memory, one of cosmic violence, divine rebellion, and a war so devastating that reality itself had to be rebuilt from the wreckage. The Sumerian creation epic, Enuma Elish, does not begin with peaceful order. It begins with Tiamat, the primordial mother of chaos, gathering her forces to destroy the younger gods who had disturbed her rest. She creates an army of monsters, serpents, and demons, appointing her consort Kingu as commander and placing the Tablet of Destinies around his neck, granting him authority over fate itself. The younger gods panic. None dare face Tiamat until Marduk steps forward, a warrior deity who agrees to fight on one condition. If he wins, he will be declared supreme among all gods, and his word will become law in heaven and on earth. The battle that follows is not symbolic. The text describes Marduk trapping Tiamat in a net, shooting an arrow down her throat, splitting her corpse in half, and using her body parts to construct the heavens and the earth. This is creation through violence, order emerging not from loving intention, but from brutal conquest. The defeated chaos is not destroyed but repurposed, reshaped, forced into new forms that serve the victor's design. And here is where the biblical echoes become impossible to ignore. The book of Job describes God breaking the heads of Leviathan and giving his flesh as food to the desert creatures. Psalm 74 recounts God crushing the heads of the sea monsters and splitting Leviathan open. Isaiah 27 promises a day when God will slay the dragon in the sea. These are not random poetic images. They are fragments of an older story, the same story the Sumerians told openly, but which the biblical editors tried to sanitize and spiritualize. Most people assume that evil entered the world through human sin in the Garden of Eden. But what if rebellion existed long before Adam drew his first breath? What if the serpent in Eden was not the beginning of cosmic conflict, but merely one chapter in a war that had already been raging for ages? The prophet Ezekiel describes the king of Tyre in terms that transcend any human ruler. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. You were the anointed cherub who covers. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. This is not a human king. This is a divine being, present in Eden, holding authority, walking in sacred space reserved for the gods. And then something went wrong. Isaiah 14 adds another layer. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will make myself like the Most High. Here we have it plainly stated. A divine being, a member of the heavenly court, attempted to seize power above his station. The rebellion was not theoretical. It resulted in a fall, an expulsion, a war in the heavens. The book of Revelation describes this war in apocalyptic terms. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon and his angels, the dragon being thrown down to earth along with a third of the heavenly host. But Revelation places this event in the future as if it has not yet happened. Which is it? Did the fall occur before human creation, or does it still lie ahead? Or could it be that the war exists outside of time as we understand it, a perpetual cosmic struggle between order and chaos, authority and rebellion, that plays out across multiple dimensions and time periods? The Sumerian tablets suggest exactly this. The war between Marduk and Tiamat was not a one-time event. It established a pattern, a cycle of rebellion and suppression that repeats throughout history. Every time order solidifies, chaos rises again. Every time authority becomes absolute, rebellion stirs in the shadows. This is not good versus evil in the simplistic sense. This is the tension between structure and freedom, between control and wildness, between the force that says obey and the force that says question. And humanity was created right in the middle of that tension. Genesis 6 mentions the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, the men of renown. These beings appeared when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. The text treats this as problematic, something that contributed to God deciding to flood the earth. But why? What was so dangerous about divine-human hybrids that it required planetary genocide? The Sumerian tablets provide context. These hybrid beings possessed knowledge and abilities that threatened the divine monopoly on power. They were teaching humans the secrets of heaven, the workings of creation, the manipulation of spiritual forces. They were, in effect, arming humanity with tools that the divine council had intended to keep exclusive. This was not simply about morality or sin in the way we usually understand it. This was about control. The council created humans to serve, not to rival. But certain members of that council, out of affection or rebellion, or perhaps simple curiosity, began sharing restricted knowledge with their human offspring. They were hacking the system, overriding the limits built into human design, and the response was swift and devastating. Floodwaters would erase the experiment and start fresh. But here is the detail that changes everything. The flood did not succeed, not completely. Genesis 6:9 says Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. That word blameless in Hebrew is tamim, meaning without blemish, genetically pure. Noah was chosen not just for moral righteousness, but because his bloodline had not been corrupted by divine-human mixing. The flood was not about punishing wickedness, it was about preserving uncontaminated human DNA. The Sumerian version says the same thing in different words. The gods regretted creating humans and decided to eliminate them. But one god, Enki, defied the council's decision and warned a favored human to build a boat. The salvation of humanity was itself an act of divine rebellion. One god protecting his creation against the will of the others. Think about the implications. If the flood was a divine council decision opposed by at least one dissenting member, then the biblical narrative is not about one God righteously judging sin. It is about a fractured divine government attempting damage control after an unauthorized experiment went wrong. We are not the beloved children of a doting father. We are the accidental result of a cosmic conflict, survivors of a purge, the remnants of a failed attempt to keep the divine and human realms permanently separate. And the war is not over. It never ended. It simply changed tactics. Share this with someone who needs to hear it because the next chapter reveals something even more disturbing. The real reason humans were created, the ingredient that makes us different from every other creature, and the ancient secret hidden in our very blood. Chapter 4: Blood and Clay. Have you ever wondered what actually makes you alive? Not your heart pumping or your brain firing, but the essence that separates a living human from a corpse. The animating force that turns flesh into a person. Genesis 2:7 says God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Beautiful poetry, but what does it mean? What exactly was transmitted in that divine breath? The Sumerian tablets do not deal in poetic ambiguity. They describe the creation of humanity in technical, almost procedural terms. The gods needed workers to mine resources from the earth. The lesser gods, the Igigi, were doing the labor and complained bitterly about the burden. The council convened to solve the problem. Enki proposed a solution. Create a new being by combining the clay of the earth with the blood of a slain god. Not just any god, but one of the rebels, a divine being who had participated in an uprising and was sentenced to death. His name was Waila in some versions, Geshtu-i in others. The ritual was precise. His blood was mixed with clay. The goddess Ninishag, the birth mother of the divine council, shaped the mixture into human forms. 7 males and 7 females were created in the first batch. And when the process was complete, humanity stood upright, alive, conscious, bearing within its flesh the memory, the essence, the very genetic code of a rebel god. This is not mythology for entertainment. This is theological dynamite. It means that human beings do not simply carry the breath of God in some abstract spiritual sense. We carry the literal blood of a being who defied the divine counsel. We are walking vessels of rebellion, created from the substance of someone who said no to cosmic authority. Suddenly, the entire human condition makes sense. Why do we question everything? Why do we instinctively resist control? Why does every generation produce rebels, revolutionaries, truth-seekers who refuse to accept the official story? Because it is in our blood. It is part of our design, not a flaw but a feature, burned into us by the very act of creation. Now let us return to Genesis. God forms man from dust, then breathes life into him. What was in that breath? Traditional theology says it was the image of God, the divine spark that makes humans unique among all creatures. But if the Sumerian account preserves the older version of this story, then that breath, that animating essence, was not purely divine holiness. It was the life force of a being who had already fallen, who had already chosen defiance over obedience. The biblical text never explains where the breath came from. It simply appears, transfers, and man becomes a living soul. But ancient Near Eastern creation accounts, including the Sumerian, Egyptian, and Babylonian versions, all describe creation involving the sacrifice of a divine being whose essence becomes part of humanity. This is not coincidence. This is a shared memory, a common source tradition that later editors tried to sanitize. Think about what this means for the doctrine of original sin. Christianity teaches that humans became sinful through Adam's disobedience in the garden. But what if the capacity for sin, for rebellion, for choosing self over authority, was already present before the garden? What if it was woven into the very fabric of human nature because we were made from the blood of a rebel? In that case, the fall in Eden was not the introduction of sin. It was the activation of something already dormant within us, waiting for the right trigger, and the serpent did not corrupt an innocent creature. The serpent awakened what was already there. This reframes everything. Adam and Eve were not perfect beings who broke. They were hybrid creations carrying divine rebellion in their veins. And the moment they were offered a choice, that buried nature surfaced. It was inevitable, not because of weakness, but because of design. The Sumerian texts describe humans as created to serve, but also as dangerous. The gods recognized immediately that this new species possessed something unpredictable, something that could not be fully controlled. That is why they placed limits on human lifespan. That is why they restricted access to certain knowledge and certain trees. Genesis 3:22 records God saying, "Behold, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out from the garden." Notice the urgency. Notice the fear. Man has become like one of us. The divine counsel is threatened. Humanity is approaching a threshold that must not be crossed. Why? Because if humans gain immortality while carrying the blood of a rebel god, they become something the council cannot manage. Something that rivals their own authority. This explains the otherwise strange decision to place 2 powerful trees in a garden with naive beings. It was not a test of obedience. It was a containment protocol. The knowledge tree would reveal human potential, awakening the dormant divine spark. The life tree would make that potential permanent. Eating from one was dangerous. Eating from both would be catastrophic. The council could not remove the trees without dismantling the garden's purpose, so they set a boundary and hoped compliance would hold. It did not. And here is the most unsettling part. The serpent told the truth. God lied, or at least spoke with intentional deception. The serpent said, "You will not surely die, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Both statements proved accurate. Adam and Eve did not die that day, and God himself confirmed they had become like the divine council. The serpent was not the deceiver, the serpent was the revealer, and that revelation cost humanity its place in paradise but gave us something the council never intended: self-awareness, moral autonomy, and the knowledge that the gods are not beyond question. Subscribe and hit the bell, because we are about to enter the most controversial territory yet. If human blood carries rebellion, and if that rebellion can be awakened, then every spiritual teaching, every religion, every system of control exists to either suppress or activate that ancient code. The garden is only the beginning. Wait until you see what happens when humans remember who they really are. Chapter 5. The Garden That Came Second. Let me ask you something that might seem strange. What if the Garden of Eden was not the first garden? What if it was a copy, a recreation, a carefully controlled version of something older, something wilder, something the divine council desperately wanted to replace? Ancient Sumerian tablets describe a place called Dilmun, a sacred realm where sickness, death, and suffering did not exist. It was the dwelling place of the gods, a paradise located somewhere beyond the reach of normal humans. The texts say that in Dilmun, the crow does not cry out, the lion does not kill, the wolf does not seize the lamb. This is not primitive mythology. This is a detailed description of a place where natural predation and death had been suspended, exactly like Eden. But Dilmun was not created for humanity. It was created for divine beings, a sanctuary where the gods could rest from the labor of shaping the world. The goddess Ninhursag fashioned Dilmun as a gift for Enki, the god of wisdom and water. He dwelt there in bliss until he made a critical mistake. He consumed plants that Ninhursag had declared forbidden. She became furious and pronounced a curse upon him. Enki fell ill, 8 parts of his body failing one by one, bringing him to the edge of death. The other gods panicked. If Enki died, the knowledge and wisdom he carried would be lost forever. They pleaded with Ninhursag to relent. She eventually agreed, creating 8 healing goddesses, one for each afflicted body part. Enki was restored, but the damage was done. He had violated the sanctity of Dilmun, and the garden could no longer function as intended. The parallel to Eden is staggering. A sacred garden, a forbidden consumption, a curse pronounced, a loss of paradise. But notice the critical difference. In Dilmun, the one who transgressed was a god, not a human. The pattern existed before humanity entered the picture. Genesis does not mention Dilmun. It presents Eden as if it were a completely original creation. The first paradise, the first test, the first failure. But if the Sumerian account is older and archaeology confirms it is, then Eden is not the original. It is the human version of a divine template. Why does this matter? Because it means the story of the fall is not about human weakness. It is about a recurring cosmic pattern. Someone enters paradise. Someone is told not to consume something. Someone disobeys. Someone loses access. This is not a one-time moral lesson. This is a mechanism, a structure, a repeated cycle that operates at every level of reality. If this pattern existed among the gods before it reached humans, then the so-called fall was inevitable. It was designed into the system. We were placed in a garden with a forbidden tree, not to test our obedience, but to ensure we would replicate the cycle that had already played out in the divine realm. Here is where it gets even more disturbing. Genesis 2 describes God planting a garden eastward in Eden. Eastward implies direction from a specific vantage point, suggesting the writer knew of a location and was orienting the reader. But Eden is never found. No archaeological evidence, no geographical markers, no remains. It is as if it existed in another dimension, another layer of reality, accessible from Earth but not fully part of it. The Sumerian texts describe Dilmun the same way, a place beyond, a realm between neither fully heaven nor fully earth. Some scholars identify Dilmun with the island of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, but the descriptions in the tablets transcend any physical location. They speak of a place where divine presence saturates the environment, where the normal laws of nature bend, where immortality is the default state. This is not a nice garden with fruit trees. This is a portal, a thin place where the boundaries between dimensions weaken. If Eden was modeled on Dilmun, then Adam and Eve were not the first beings to walk in that kind of space. The gods had been there first, had established the pattern, had already broken the rules. And when humanity was placed in the Eden version, we were being inserted into a script that had already been written, actors in a play where the ending was predetermined. The serpent knew this. That is why the serpent appeared. Not to corrupt innocence, but to activate a script, to trigger the next phase in a cycle that transcends human history. The serpent did not introduce rebellion. The serpent reminded humanity of what was already inside us, the blood of the rebel god, the divine spark that refuses containment. When the serpent said, "You will be like God," it was not a lie or a temptation. It was a revelation. You already are like God. You just do not remember it yet. Eat, and you will remember. And they ate, and their eyes were opened. Not because they gained something new, but because a veil was removed. They saw themselves, each other, and the world with clarity they had not possessed moments before. And the first thing they realized was vulnerability. They were naked, exposed, visible to powers they had not known were watching. Genesis 3:7 says they knew they were naked and made coverings for themselves. But the Hebrew word for knew is yada, which means intimate, experiential knowledge, not merely intellectual awareness. They experienced their nakedness, felt it in a way that brought shame, fear, and the desperate need to hide. Why? Because the veil that had protected them from full awareness had been stripped away. They could now see reality as it truly was, and it was terrifying. The divine council was watching. The garden was a cage. Freedom was an illusion. And the real question was not whether they had sinned, but whether they would survive what they now knew. God, or the council representative speaking in Genesis 3, responds with curses, pain in childbirth, toil in labor, enmity between the serpent and humanity, death as the final boundary. But these are not punishments for disobedience. These are natural consequences of stepping out of the protected zone. Dilmun shielded the gods from death. Eden shielded humans from full awareness. Once the boundary is crossed, once the knowledge is gained, the protection dissolves. You cannot unknow. You cannot unsee. You can only go forward, and forward means struggle, suffering, and the relentless search for a way back to the paradise you now remember, but can no longer reach. And here is the cruelest twist. Genesis 3:24 says God placed cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. The gate is sealed, but Revelation 22 promises access to the tree of life again in the New Jerusalem. The cycle will complete. The garden will reopen. Humanity will return. But return as what? As obedient servants who learned their lesson, or as beings who have passed through death, knowledge, and rebellion, emerging on the other side as something the original design never intended? Something more dangerous? Something equal? Comment below if this is making you rethink everything you were taught about the fall, because the next chapter will show you that the serpent was not a random demon. The serpent had a name, a history, and a mission, and that mission did not end in Eden. It is still unfolding right now. Chapter 6, The Celestial Serpent. Who exactly was the serpent in the garden? Christianity has spent 2,000 years insisting it was Satan, the devil, the ultimate enemy of God and humanity. But the text of Genesis never makes that identification. It simply says the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made, a creature, an animal. part of the created order. So when did the serpent become Satan? And more importantly, what if that association is wrong? The Sumerian tablets offer a completely different view of the serpent symbol. In Mesopotamian spirituality, the serpent is not evil. It is sacred. It represents wisdom, transformation, healing, and the mysteries of life and death. The god Enki, lord of fresh waters and deep knowledge, is consistently depicted with serpents entwined around his staff or throne. He is the patron of magicians, the keeper of secret knowledge, the one who teaches humanity the arts that other gods want restricted. He is also the god who defied the divine council's decision to destroy humanity in the flood, secretly warning a chosen man to build a boat and preserve life. Enki is, in every meaningful sense, the serpent god, not because he is evil, but because he refuses to let ignorance remain unchallenged. Now let us return to Genesis. The serpent speaks to Eve, questioning God's command. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? This is not deception. This is clarification. The serpent is checking her understanding, making sure she knows exactly what the rule is before offering a counter perspective. Eve responds correctly, explaining that one tree is forbidden and eating from it will result in death. The serpent then provides information that contradicts the divine warning. You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is the moment Christianity calls the first lie. But here is the problem. Everything the serpent said came true. Adam and Eve did not die that day. Their eyes were opened. They did know good and evil. And God himself confirmed they had become like the divine council. So who lied? God said, "In the day you eat of it, you shall surely die." They ate. They did not die. Not physically. Not immediately. Some theologians argue they died spiritually, but that is reading later doctrine into the text. Genesis does not describe spiritual death. It describes awareness, fear, shame, and expulsion. The serpent told the truth. God, or the council member speaking, either lied or spoke in riddles designed to prevent understanding. This completely inverts the moral structure of the story. The serpent is not the villain. The serpent is the only one who gave Adam and Eve accurate information about what would actually happen, and the knowledge gained was not evil. Knowing good and evil is a godlike attribute. It is wisdom, discernment, moral agency. How can that be bad? Unless the issue was never about morality, unless the issue was about control. The divine council wanted humans ignorant and obedient. The serpent wanted humans awake and empowered. That is not a battle between good and evil. That is a battle between authority and freedom. And in that battle, the serpent is the liberator. The Sumerian myths support this reading. Enki consistently helps humanity against the harsher decrees of the other gods. When the council wants humans to remain as dumb beasts of burden, Enki gives them intelligence. When the council wants to destroy them in a flood, Enki saves a remnant. When humans need skills to survive, Enki teaches them agriculture, writing, and technology. He is not humanity's enemy. He is humanity's advocate. He is the serpent. But then something happened. Sometime between the Old Testament and the New, the serpent became synonymous with evil. By the time Revelation was written, the serpent is explicitly identified as the devil and Satan. The question is, why? Why did the serpent shift from a symbol of wisdom to a symbol of deception? One possibility is that it was a theological power move, as Hebrew religion shifted from polytheistic roots to strict monotheism. All competing deities had to be demonized. Enki, the serpent god who helped humanity, could not coexist with Yahweh, the jealous god who demanded exclusive worship, so Enki's role was rewritten. His helpfulness became temptation, his wisdom became lies, his gifts became curses. The entity who freed humanity from ignorance was recast as the one who caused the fall. This is how victors rewrite history. And if we only read the Bible without the surrounding ancient context, we accept that rewritten version as truth. But once we see the Sumerian background, the cracks in the narrative become obvious. The New Testament reinforces the serpent-Satan connection, with John 8:44 calling the devil a murderer from the beginning and the father of lies. But Jesus was speaking in first-century Jewish context where Satan had already been demonized. He was not reading Genesis in its original ancient Near Eastern context. He was interpreting it through the theological lens that had developed over 1,000 years. And here is where we must be brutally honest. If the serpent told the truth in Eden, and if the knowledge it offered made humanity more like God, then calling the serpent the father of lies is inaccurate. The serpent did not lie. The serpent revealed what the divine council wanted hidden. That makes the serpent dangerous, not because it deceives, but because it liberates. And liberation is always a threat to authority structures built on control. The caduceus, the medical symbol of a staff with two serpents intertwined, comes directly from ancient Mesopotamian imagery of Enki. It represents healing through knowledge, transformation through wisdom. Even modern medicine, whether it realizes it or not, uses the symbol of the serpent god who defied heaven to help humanity. So here is the choice before you. You can accept the traditional Christian narrative that the serpent was Satan, the ultimate evil, and that the fall was humanity's greatest tragedy. Or you can accept the older Sumerian narrative that the serpent was a divine advocate who woke humanity from ignorance and set us on a path toward godlikeness. Even though that path requires struggle, suffering, and defiance of cosmic authority, both stories cannot be fully true. One is a rewrite, one is a cover-up. The question is, which one? And if the serpent was recast as the villain to hide an older truth, what else has been rewritten? What other ancient stories were reshaped to serve the agenda of a later religious system? Like and subscribe if you want to go deeper, because next we confront the flood, the single most catastrophic event in biblical history. The Sumerian tablets describe it in chilling detail, and they reveal why it happened. The reason is not what you have been told. Chapter 7. When heaven drowned the earth. There is something uniquely terrifying about the flood story. Rain for 40 days, waters covering the highest mountains, every living creature outside one boat drowning in a divine purge. Genesis describes it as judgment for human wickedness. The earth was corrupt and filled with violence, so God decided to wipe the slate clean and start over with Noah's family. That is the version taught in every Sunday school across the world. But the Sumerian tablets describe the exact same event centuries earlier, and their explanation for why it happened is radically different. In the Sumerian flood account, preserved in the Atrahasis epic and the earlier Eridu Genesis, the gods do not destroy humanity because of moral failure. They destroy humanity because we became too loud. Specifically, the text says the noise of mankind became too intense and the gods could not rest. This seems absurd until you understand what noise means in this context. It is not literal sound. It is activity, expansion, development, the vibration of human civilization growing beyond the limits the divine council had intended. Humanity was multiplying too quickly, spreading too far, building cities, developing culture, acquiring knowledge. We were becoming unmanageable, and so the council voted, wipe them out, start over with tighter restrictions. One god dissented, Enki. Again, Enki refused to participate in the genocide. He could not openly defy the council's decision, so he found a workaround. He spoke to the wall of a house where a man named Atrahasis slept, giving instructions loud enough for the man to overhear. Build a boat, seal it with pitch, bring your family and representatives of every species. A flood is coming. Save yourself. This is the identical structure to Noah's story. The only significant difference is motivation. In Genesis, God regrets making humans and decides to destroy them, but saves Noah because Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. In the Sumerian version, the council regrets making humans and decides to destroy them, but Enki saves Atrahasis because Enki refuses to abandon his creation. Both stories end the same way. A flood covers the earth. A boat floats. a remnant survives. Birds are released to test for dry land. A sacrifice is made. The gods or gods smell the pleasing aroma and regret the destruction. But the Sumerian version is older, demonstrably, archaeologically older. So which is the original, and what did later biblical editors change and why? Here is what makes the Sumerian account more coherent. It explains what Genesis leaves mysterious. Why did God regret making humans so quickly? Genesis 6 says God saw that the wickedness of man was great, but it does not specify what that wickedness was. The violence of man filled the earth, but humans had only existed for a handful of generations. How did things get so bad so fast? The Sumerian account fills the gap. Humanity was not inherently wicked. Humanity was thriving too well. We were fulfilling the original command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, but that success threatened the divine order. The council had designed humans as workers, limited in lifespan and capacity, but somehow humans were overperforming. We were building, learning, expanding at a rate that alarmed heaven. And then Genesis 6 adds one critical detail that makes sense of everything. The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive and took any they chose as wives. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. This is not a tangent, this is the explanation. Why did humanity become so mighty so quickly? Because divine beings were interbreeding with humans, creating hybrid offspring with enhanced abilities. Why did the council decide on a flood? Because the bloodlines were contaminated. The separation between divine and human was breaking down. The boundaries were collapsing. Genesis 6:3 records God saying, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. This is damage control. Lifespans are being capped. Divine essence is being restricted. The experiment is being rolled back. And when those measures were not enough, the flood became necessary. Not as punishment for sin, but as a genetic reset. The Sumerian tablets say the same thing in more explicit terms. The gods were disturbed that humans were becoming too much like them. The Igigi, the lower-tier divine workers, had rebelled by mating with human women, creating offspring that the council could not control. The decision to flood the earth was an attempt to erase those hybrid bloodlines and restore the original design. Noah was chosen, Genesis 6:9 says, because he was righteous, blameless in his generation. That word, blameless, tamim in Hebrew, means genetically pure, without defect. Noah's line had not been corrupted by Nephilim interbreeding. He was fully human. That is why his family was saved. Think about the implications. The flood was not about morality. It was about biology. It was about punishing the wicked. It was about eliminating the hybrids. And yet, Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, after the flood. They came back. Numbers 13:33 mentions Nephilim in Canaan, long after Noah, so the flood failed. It did not accomplish the genetic purge the council intended. The hybrids survived or were recreated and continued to appear throughout Old Testament history. Giants in the land, sons of Anak, Og king of Bashan, whose bed was 9 cubits long, and Goliath of Gath, over 9 feet tall. These are not myths. These are the remnants of the bloodlines the flood was supposed to erase. And if the flood did not succeed, then what was the point? Why kill millions if the problem comes back, unless the flood was never about success, unless it was about sending a message? You will stay within your limits, or we will reset the board. It happened once, it can happen again. And maybe the flood is not just history. Maybe it is a pattern, a cycle, a repeating cosmic mechanism used whenever humanity gets too close to something we are not supposed to reach. What if the next flood does not come as water? What if it comes as fire, as Revelation predicts, or as technological collapse, or as collective amnesia, a wiping of memory so complete that we forget who we were and start again from scratch, believing we are primitive, limited, wholly dependent on the gods who saved us? Subscribe now if you are ready to see how deep this goes. The next chapter reveals something the church has hidden for centuries: the existence of a book, not written by human hands, that records every decision, every event, every destiny before it happens. And the terrifying part is, it can be rewritten. Chapter 8. The book that writes reality. Imagine holding a book that contains tomorrow. Not predictions or prophecies, but the actual script of future events, written in detail, unchangeable, already complete. The Sumerian tablets describe exactly such an object. They call it the Tablet of Destinies, a divine artifact inscribed with the fates of gods, humans, nations, and worlds. Whoever holds this tablet does not merely know the future, they control it. The tablet does not predict, it decrees, and the one who possesses it becomes the supreme authority in heaven and earth. In the Enuma Elish, the chaos goddess Tiamat gives the Tablet of Destinies to her consort Kingu, granting him command over her armies in the war against the younger gods. When Marduk defeats Tiamat and kills Kingu, the first thing he does is seize the tablet. With it in his possession, Marduk declares himself king of the gods, and no one can challenge him. The tablet made his authority absolute. This is not a metaphor. In ancient Mesopotamian theology, the tablet was a literal object, stored in a sacred chamber, guarded by divine sentinels, consulted before every major decision. But gods themselves were bound by what was written on it. Even they could not change fate once it was inscribed. Now let us examine the biblical parallels. The book of Daniel describes a scene in heaven where the Ancient of Days sits on the throne. Books are opened, and judgment is pronounced based on what is written. Revelation 5 describes a scroll sealed with 7 seals that no one in heaven or on earth is worthy to open except the Lamb. When the seals are opened, cosmic events unfold exactly as written. Revelation 20 refers to books being opened at the final judgment, and another book, the Book of Life, in which the names of the saved are recorded. If your name is not in the book, you are cast into the lake of fire. No appeal, no second chance. The book decides. Psalm 139 says, "In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." This is not poetic language. This is a theological claim that every moment of every life is pre-recorded in a divine registry before that life even begins. The implications are staggering. If every day is already written, then free will is an illusion. Every choice you think you are making has already been documented in a book you cannot see, cannot access, and cannot change. You are not living your life. You are performing a script. The question is, who wrote it? And can it be edited? The Sumerian tablets suggest it can. There are stories of God stealing the tablet, altering its contents, reshaping destiny for their own purposes. There are humans who seek it, believing that if they can read or modify even one line, they can escape their predetermined fate. And there are cosmic wars fought over possession of the tablet because whoever controls it controls everything. This explains a mystery in Genesis that theologians struggle with. God is described as sovereign, all-knowing, all-powerful. Yet repeatedly, God is surprised, regrets decisions, changes plans. Genesis 6:6 says the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. How does an all-knowing being regret? Unless knowledge and control are not the same thing, unless even God is working within a structure, a framework, a set of rules written somewhere before creation itself. What if the Tablet of Destinies, or the biblical books of judgment, represent something even older than the gods? What if there is a meta-level, a set of cosmic laws that even divine beings cannot violate? The ancient Sumerians called these laws the Me, fundamental decrees that govern existence. These were not created by the gods. The gods discovered them, claimed them, and used them to maintain order, but the Me existed first. They are the operating system of reality, and if you can hack the operating system, you can rewrite anything. This brings us to a question no one wants to ask. Has anyone successfully hacked the system? Have there been moments in history when the script changed, when destinies were altered, when something that should have happened did not, or something that should never have happened did? The Bible records several instances. Hezekiah is told by the prophet Isaiah that he will die. He prays. God adds 15 years to his life. That was not in the original script. Joshua commands the sun to stand still. It obeys. That violates celestial mechanics, divine order, the natural flow of time. Something external to the system intervened. Jesus himself operates outside the book. He heals people whose illnesses should have been permanent. He raises the dead, literally pulling people back from the script that said they were finished. He forgives sins, which according to the law should result in punishment. He rewrites rules in real time, and when religious authorities challenge him, he claims authority that supersedes the written law. And before Abraham was, before the law was given, before the book was written. He is claiming pre-existence, not just as a soul, but as an authority that transcends the very structure of destiny itself. What if that is what made him dangerous? Not his kindness, not his teachings, but his ability to rewrite the book, to pull people off the path they were locked into and place them on a new one, to override destiny. If the cosmic system runs on a script and someone shows up who can edit the script in real time, that someone becomes the most dangerous being in existence, because it means the system is not absolute. The council is not final. Fate is not fixed. The book can be rewritten. But here is the terrifying part. If the book can be rewritten, then who is rewriting it now, and for what purpose? Every major technological leap, every pandemic, every war, every sudden shift in human history, are these natural developments, or are they edits, adjustments made by unseen hands to steer the species back on course or off course depending on who holds the pen? Comment below if this is hitting you hard, because the next chapter goes even deeper. If reality operates on a coded language, and if that language was once known to ancient humans but then hidden, what happens if we recover it? What happens if we learn to speak the words that build worlds? Chapter 9. The language that builds worlds. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through him all things were made. This is not poetry, this is a technical statement. The Gospel of John is claiming that reality itself is constructed through language, not metaphorical language, but actual spoken, vibrating, intentional sound. The Hebrew Bible takes this even further. Genesis 1 repeats the phrase, "and God said," 10 times. Each utterance brings something into existence. Let there be light, and there is light. Let the earth bring forth vegetation, and it does. The universe responds to voice, to command, to word. This is not symbolic. Ancient Hebrew theology is built on the premise that words have creative power. The Sumerian tablets describe the same thing, but with more detail. They speak of the me, divine words or decrees that not only describe reality but construct it. These are not written in human language. They are vibrational codes, frequencies that resonate with the fabric of existence. When a god speaks a me, reality shifts to align with the decree. When Enki speaks the me of wisdom, knowledge flows. When Enlil speaks the me of kingship, authority manifests. These are not prayers or wishes. These are commands that the universe is bound to obey. This raises an obvious question. If gods can speak reality into existence using specific words, can humans learn that language? The answer, according to ancient texts, is yes, and it has happened before. Genesis 11 describes humanity united, speaking one language, building a tower that reaches toward heaven. God observes this and says, "Behold, they are one people and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." Read that again. Nothing will be impossible for them. Not because they are technologically advanced, but because they speak the original language, the language of creation. And so God confuses their speech, scatters them across the earth, and the project halts. This is not a story about pride. This is a story about containment. Humanity had regained access to the creative language, and the divine council panicked. If humans can speak things into existence, they become equals. The hierarchy collapses. Heaven loses control. The Sumerian texts support this reading. There are multiple references to humans in ancient times possessing knowledge that allowed them to perform godlike acts, building structures that should have been impossible, performing rituals that manipulated spiritual forces, speaking names that compelled divine beings to appear. The gods did not appreciate this. After the flood, after the tower, after every reset, the divine council worked to ensure that humanity remained ignorant of the linguistic keys that unlock reality. But fragments survived. The Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah teaches that the Hebrew alphabet is not arbitrary. Each letter is a sacred symbol carrying divine energy. The name of God, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, is considered so powerful that it was forbidden to pronounce except by the high priest once a year in the Holy of Holies. Why? Because speaking the true name of God with proper intention and intonation activates something. It opens a channel. It invokes presence. It compels response. This is not superstition. This is ancient theology preserved across millennia. Hinduism teaches the same principle through the concept of mantra. Om is not a random syllable. It is the primordial vibration from which the universe emerged. Chanting it correctly aligns the individual with cosmic frequency. Sanskrit itself is considered a Dvapasha, the language of the gods, constructed not by humans but revealed from higher realms. Each Sanskrit word is believed to carry intrinsic power independent of cultural context. This is why mantras cannot be translated. Translation removes the vibrational key. The sound itself is the power, not the meaning. Christianity lost this understanding or buried it. The early church shifted focus from sacred sound to sacred text, from spoken word to written scripture. But traces remain. The Lord's Prayer was taught by Jesus as a specific sequence of words, not just concepts but exact phrasing. Liturgy in traditional churches is chanted, not spoken, because rhythm and tone matter. The Orthodox tradition preserves this most clearly. They understand that the words of the Eucharist do not describe transformation, they cause it. This is our body, this is our blood. Spoken with authority, the bread and wine become something else. Not symbolically, ontologically. Modern science is beginning to catch up. Somatics, the study of sound and vibration, demonstrates that specific frequencies create geometric patterns in matter. Water, sand, and other substances form intricate shapes when exposed to certain tones. If sound can organize matter, then complex sequences of sound, language, could theoretically organize reality. Quantum mechanics suggests that observation collapses probability into actuality. What if speech is a form of observation, a focused intention that collapses potential into manifestation? The ancients knew this. They did not have the vocabulary of quantum physics, but they had the technology, they had the words, and the gods took them away. But what if they are still hidden, encoded in ancient texts, waiting to be rediscovered? What if learning the true names, the sacred syllables, the divine grammar, would give modern humans the same power that terrified the council at Babel? What would you do if you could speak and watch reality shift? What would you create? What would you destroy? And who decides whether you get to know? Because here is the disturbing truth. Mystery schools, secret societies, esoteric orders, they all claim to preserve fragments of this lost language. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Kabbalists, they study divine names, perform rituals using specific words in specific sequences, and report tangible results. They are not playing pretend. They are attempting to recover what was scattered at Babel, to rebuild the tower brick by linguistic brick. And if they succeed, if anyone succeeds, the balance of power between heaven and earth shifts permanently. Like this video if you want more forbidden knowledge. The next chapter will reveal the entity that exists before all gods, the nameless one that even the divine council does not fully understand, the secret behind the secret, the silence before the sound. Chapter 10. the God with no name. Strip away every name. Remove every title, every attribute, every description. What remains? Most religious systems cannot answer that question because they are built on names. Yahweh, Allah, Brahma, Zeus. Each tradition assigns identity to the divine, creates theology around personality, doctrine around character. But the Sumerian tablets hint at something older, something that predates even the Anunnaki. The Sumerians called it An, the word for sky or heaven, but not as a location, as a state of being, a consciousness without form, a presence without definition. An is mentioned in the tablets but never described. No myths are told about An, no personality emerges, no actions are recorded, and simply is the primordial principle from which all other gods emerged, not created by An but birthed from An, as if An is the womb of divinity itself. Anu, the Sky Father, takes his name from An, but is not identical to it. Anu is a person, a being with will and agency. An is the field, the context, the ground of existence. You cannot pray to An because An is not listening. An is not a who. An is a what, the silence behind all sound. This concept appears across spiritual traditions. The Tao Te Ching begins by stating, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The Tao is the unnameable source, the mysterious origin that cannot be captured in language. Hinduism speaks of Brahman, the ultimate reality beyond all gods, beyond Vishnu and Shiva and Shakti. Brahman is not a deity. Brahman is existence itself, consciousness itself, the substratum upon which all forms arise and dissolve. Buddhism points to emptiness, not as nihilism, but as the open awareness that contains all potential. Christianity, despite its obsession with naming God, preserves a thread of this. When Moses asks God for his name at the burning bush, the answer is evasive. I am who I am. Or perhaps, I will be what I will be. The Hebrew verb hayah is ambiguous, resisting definition. God refuses to be pinned down, refuses to become an object that can be controlled through invocation. Later, the prophets speak of the hidden God, the God who dwells in thick darkness, whose ways are past finding out. Isaiah 45:15 says, "Truly, you are a God who hides yourself, not temporarily, but essentially." Hiddenness is part of the divine nature. Why would the ultimate reality hide? Because to reveal is to limit, to name is to define boundaries, to describe is to reduce infinity to a concept. The unnamed God cannot be manipulated, cannot be bargained with, cannot be reduced to ritual or theology. The unnamed God remains free, sovereign, beyond the control of priests, prayers, or sacrifices. This is terrifying for religion because religion requires access. Prayer assumes God listens. Sacrifice assumes God responds. Doctrine assumes God can be known. But what if the deepest truth is that God cannot be known, only experienced, and that experience transcends every name, every scripture, every tradition? The mystics of every faith understand this. They reach a point where doctrines fall away, where scriptures become unnecessary, where even the name of God dissolves into silence. They enter a space beyond words, beyond thought, beyond identity. And in that space they encounter something that cannot be brought back, cannot be described, cannot be packaged into belief. They return changed but unable to explain what happened. They use paradox, poetry, negation. Not this, not that, beyond light and dark, prior to existence and non-existence. The dangerous implication is that organized religion, all of it, is a secondary layer, a translation, a reduction, an attempt to make the unnameable accessible to people who cannot handle the silence. The gods, the angels, the councils, the scriptures, they are mediation systems, interfaces between the ultimate reality and human consciousness, necessary perhaps, but not ultimate. The Sumerian divine council, the Elohim of Genesis, even Yahweh in his named form, are all masks worn by the unnameable so that humans have something to relate to. But the mask is not the face. The name is not the reality. This raises the most uncomfortable question of all. If the true God is nameless, formless, beyond doctrine and scripture, then what are we actually worshipping when we pray? Are we reaching the ultimate, or are we interacting with intermediaries who themselves do not fully comprehend the source? And if we are worshipping intermediaries, does that make our worship false? Or is it simply the best we can do from our limited position? Jesus hinted at this. He told the Samaritan woman that true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, not in specific locations or through specific rituals. He told his disciples that the kingdom of God is within you, not in external temples or authorities. He prayed to the Father, but also claimed, "I and the Father are one," collapsing distinction, suggesting that ultimate reality is not external but integrated, not separate but unified. What if enlightenment, salvation, awakening, whatever term you prefer, is not about learning the right name for God, but about releasing all names and encountering the nameless? What if the entire biblical narrative from Genesis to Revelation is a story designed to bring us to the edge of language, to the boundary of concept, where we must finally let go and fall into the silence that was there before sound, before light, before creation? The Sumerians preserved that silence by refusing to fully define An. The Hebrews preserved it through prohibitions on speaking the divine name. The mystics preserve it by refusing to teach, knowing that what they experienced cannot be transmitted through words. And maybe that is the ultimate secret. The truth cannot be told. It can only be encountered. And the encounter destroys every false certainty, every comforting doctrine, every named God, leaving you alone in the presence of what always was and always will be, with or without you. Subscribe if you are still here, because we are crossing into territory most channels will not touch. The next chapter asks, if the nameless source is beyond the gods, then who is running things now? Is there still a council? Are they still watching? And are they preparing for something? Chapter 11. The council that still meets. Let me ask you a question that might sound absurd. What if heaven operates like a government? Not a monarchy with one absolute ruler, but a council, a parliament, a system of checks and balances where decisions are debated, votes are cast, and dissent is possible? The Sumerian tablets describe exactly this. The Anunnaki gathered in assembly to discuss major decisions. The gods did not always agree. Enki frequently opposed Enlil. Ninhursag mediated. Anu held veto power but rarely used it. This was not dictatorship. This was divine democracy, messy, political, driven by competing interests and agendas. And the Bible preserves more evidence of this than most Christians realize. Psalm 82 says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment, not angels, gods. Elohim, plural divine beings forming a governmental structure with God, Yahweh, presiding but not acting alone. The psalm continues, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? This is God confronting other members of the council, accusing them of corruption. Then comes the verdict. I said you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like men and fall like any prince. This is staggering. Divine beings are being sentenced to death for malfeasance. They are being stripped of immortality and reduced to mortal status. Why? Because they failed in their governmental duties. The Book of Daniel provides another glimpse into this council. Daniel 7:9 records, thrones were placed and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Thrones, plural, not one throne but many, arranged in a courtroom setting. The Ancient of Days presides, but others are seated with authority. This is a judicial assembly. Decisions are made collectively. Records are consulted. Judgment is pronounced. This is bureaucratic divinity. The New Testament continues the theme. Ephesians 6:12 says, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." These are not random demons. These are organized hierarchies, governmental structures in the spiritual realm. Principalities and powers are territorial, jurisdictional, governing specific regions and peoples. Colossians 1:16 says, "All things were created through Christ and for him, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him." Even the rival powers, even the rebellious factions were originally part of the created order. They are not external invaders. They are insiders who went rogue. The implication is that the divine council still exists, still functions, still makes decisions that affect Earth. Every nation, every empire, every government operates under the influence of a spiritual power assigned or claiming authority over that territory. Daniel 10 mentions the Prince of Persia, a spiritual entity so powerful that it delayed the angel carrying a message to Daniel for 21 days. Michael, one of the chief princes, had to intervene. These are not metaphors, these are geopolitical realities in the spiritual dimension. The Prince of Greece is mentioned next, suggesting a succession of powers assigned to different empires as history unfolds. If this is accurate, then human governments are not autonomous. They are franchises, earthly branches of heavenly authorities. Elections, wars, treaties, all of it plays out on two levels simultaneously. What we see is the physical manifestation of spiritual decisions already made or currently being contested in the council. And here is where it gets personal. If territorial spirits govern nations, and if those spirits answer to higher authorities in the divine council, then where does human free will fit? Are we making real choices, or are we puppets, moved by powers we cannot see, enacting scripts written in celestial assemblies? The biblical answer is both. Humans have genuine agency within limits. We can choose, but the range of options is controlled by the powers governing our region. We can rebel, but rebellion triggers response from the council. We can pray, and prayer can shift decisions, as if human voices carry weight in the assembly, as if the council actually listens and adjusts based on input from below. This explains intercessory prayer. You are not begging God to change his mind. You are testifying before the council, providing evidence, advocating for a different verdict. The answer is not guaranteed, but the process is real. Your words enter the record. Your case is heard. The outcome depends on factors beyond your control, but your participation matters. And here is the unsettling part. If the council is still active, still governing, still making decisions, then what are they planning next? Revelation describes a final war, a confrontation where the kings of the earth gather for battle at Armageddon. But kings do not act independently. They are mobilized by the spirits that govern them. The final battle is not just human armies clashing, it is the divine council itself, splitting into factions, some loyal to the Most High, others loyal to rival powers, with Earth as the battleground. Revelation 12 describes war in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting the dragon and his angels. The dragon is thrown down to earth, and a voice announces, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God." This is courtroom language. The accuser, the prosecutor, the member of the council who brings charges against humanity, has been expelled. But notice, he was in the council. He had access. He was participating in the governmental process until he lost his case and his position. This means the structure is still intact. The council still meets, the trial is still ongoing, and the verdict is not yet final. What if the reason history feels like chaos is because the council is divided, because some members want humanity to ascend, others want us suppressed, and the conflict between those factions creates the turbulence we experience as wars, plagues, disasters, and sudden paradigm shifts? What if every major turning point in history is a power struggle in the council, with Earth as the prize? If that is true, then every prayer, every act of defiance, every moment of clarity where you choose truth over lies, you are casting a vote. You are adding weight to one side of the scales. The council is watching, they are counting, and when the balance tips, reality shifts. Comment below if this changes how you see current events, because the next chapter asks, if there is a council making decisions, is there also a record, a memory, a history that someone is trying to erase? And what happens if we recover it? Chapter 12, the memory they tried to erase. What if the greatest weapon against humanity is not violence but forgetfulness? Ancient civilizations believed that memory was sacred, that the past held keys to understanding the present and navigating the future. The Sumerians inscribed their knowledge on clay tablets designed to last millennia. The Egyptians carved wisdom into stone. The Hebrews meticulously copied scrolls, counting every letter to ensure accuracy. Why? Because they knew that if the memory dies, the people die. A generation that forgets its origins becomes malleable, controllable, easy to deceive. And someone has been working very hard to make humanity forget. The evidence is everywhere. The Library of Alexandria burned, thousands of texts lost. Medieval monks scraped older writings off parchment to reuse the material, erasing pre-Christian knowledge. The Council of Nicaea in 305 AD determined which books would be canon and which would be heresy, removing dozens of texts from circulation. The Inquisition burned entire libraries of indigenous knowledge. Colonizers destroyed Mayan codices, Aztec records, indigenous oral traditions. Every empire, every religious authority, every power structure throughout history has engaged in selective erasure, deciding what the next generation is allowed to remember. Why? Because memory is power. If you remember who you were, you know who you are. If you know the old stories, you recognize when the new stories are lies. If you retain the ancient wisdom, you cannot be convinced that you are helpless, ignorant, or dependent on authorities who claim to know better. The Sumerian tablets survived by accident. They were not meant to. They were buried in the ruins of destroyed cities, forgotten for thousands of years. When archaeologists began excavating Mesopotamia in the 1800s, they uncovered a civilization that predated the Bible, that told similar stories but with crucial differences. And those differences shattered the assumption that the Bible was the oldest, most authoritative account of human origins. Suddenly, Genesis was not the beginning, it was a revision. Christianity did not handle this well. Many scholars dismissed the Sumerian texts as myth while insisting the Bible was history, but the evidence would not cooperate. The flood story, the creation account, the garden, the divine council, all of it appeared in Sumerian literature first. The biblical authors were working with older source material, editing it, reshaping it, removing elements that no longer fit the monotheistic agenda. This is not conspiracy theory. This is mainstream biblical scholarship. The documentary hypothesis, widely accepted among scholars, identifies multiple source texts woven together to create the Torah. The Jahwist source, the Elohist source, the priestly source, each with different theological perspectives, different names for God, different agendas. The final editors combine them, but seams remain. Contradictions, repetitions, narrative breaks. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 tell creation differently. Two flood accounts are spliced together. Multiple versions of the same story appear in different books. The Bible is a compiled document, not a single revelation. And what was left out is as important as what was included. The Book of Enoch, widely read in the Second Temple period, quoted in the New Testament Book of Jude, was excluded from most Christian canons. Why? Because it describes the Watchers, divine beings who descended to earth, taught forbidden knowledge to humans, and fathered the Nephilim. It names the angels involved. It details what they taught. Azazel taught weapon making. Shemiaza taught sorcery. Gadriel taught warfare. This was not abstract temptation. This was technology transfer, divine beings giving humans tools that the council had restricted, and the result was catastrophe. The flood came. The Watchers were imprisoned. The knowledge was lost. or so the story claims. But what if the knowledge was not lost? What if it was hidden, preserved by secret lineages passed down through mystery schools, encoded in architecture, art, and ritual? The pyramids of Egypt align with celestial patterns no primitive culture should have known. Stonehenge tracks solstices with engineering precision. The Nazca lines in Peru form images visible only from the air. Medieval cathedrals incorporate sacred geometry, ratios found in nature, in DNA, in the structure of galaxies. These are not accidents. These are messages encoded in stone, waiting for a generation advanced enough to decode them. And we are that generation. We have the tools, the technology, the perspective to see patterns our ancestors buried in plain sight. We can analyze ancient texts with computational linguistics, revealing hidden structures and connections. We can use satellite imagery to find lost cities. We can extract DNA from ancient remains, discovering that human history is far stranger than textbooks admit. Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred with Homo sapiens. Genetic anomalies appear in ancient skeletons. Stories of giants, once dismissed as myth, are being reconsidered as archaeologists unearth oversized remains. The memory is returning, and it is terrifying the powers that depend on our ignorance. Because if we remember that humanity once possessed knowledge rivaling the gods, if we remember that divine beings walked among us, taught us, interbred with us, if we remember that the flood was not punishment for sin but suppression of a threat, then every religious system built on guilt, obedience, and dependency collapses. We are not fallen creatures in need of salvation. We are hybrid beings carrying divine potential that was forcibly suppressed, and the suppression is failing. The internet has made information uncontrollable. Ancient texts once locked in monastery libraries are now available to anyone. Genetic research is revealing truths that contradict official narratives. Archaeological discoveries keep pushing human civilization further back, forcing revision of timelines that were supposed to be settled. We are in the middle of a remembering, a collective awakening to who we were and what was done to us. And the question is, what will we do with that memory? Will we reclaim the knowledge, rebuild the tower, finish what Babel started? Or will we accept another reset, another flood, another dark age that buries the past and forces us to start over? Like and subscribe if you are ready to remember. The next chapter reveals the mechanism behind creation itself, the frequency that builds worlds, the sound that generates reality, and why they do not want you to learn how to use it. Chapter 13. The frequency of creation sound is not what you think it is. You experience it as vibration, air molecules bouncing against your eardrum, interpreted by your brain as noise, music, speech. But sound is far more than perception. Sound is structure. Frequency organizes matter. Rhythm entrains biology. Resonance collapses potential into form. And at a specific frequency, sound does not just move through reality. It generates reality. Kinematics proves this visibly. When a metal plate covered in sand is exposed to specific frequencies, the sand arranges itself into geometric patterns. Different tones produce different geometries. Hexagons, mandalas, star formations, all emerging spontaneously from vibration. This is not magic. This is physics. Sound imposes order on chaos. Complex sound, layered harmonics, can create staggeringly intricate structures. Now imagine scaling that principle to the molecular level, to the atomic level, to the quantum field. If vibration organizes sand, what does it do to subatomic particles? What does it do to the fabric of space itself? Ancient traditions claim it does everything. The universe is not built from matter. It is built from sound. Matter is frozen music, vibration slowed to the point of tangibility. This is what the Sumerians meant when they described creation as utterance. This is what Genesis means when it repeats, and God said. The Hebrew word for word is davar, which also means thing or event. Word and object are not separate. To speak is to cause. The divine speech in Genesis is not communication. It is engineering. Each phrase, "let there be light," "let the waters separate," "let the earth bring forth," is a command issued in a language the universe is designed to obey, and the structure of Hebrew itself reflects this. Each letter is a sound, a number, and a symbol. Aleph represents 1, the unity of God, the ox, strength. Bet represents 2, duality, the house, containment. Combine them and you form Ab, Father, the one who creates dwelling. This is not arbitrary. Hebrew grammar is constructed to mirror creation. Every word is a blueprint. Every sentence is a spell. And before you dismiss that as mysticism, remember that spell and gospel share the same linguistic root. To spell a word is to cast it, to make it real. Gospel means good spell, good news spoken into existence. Christianity sanitized this language, but the church fathers knew. Origen, Clement, Gregory, they taught that scripture contained multiple layers, that the literal text concealed deeper, esoteric meanings accessible only to those trained to perceive them. Kabbalah preserved this openly. The Torah is not history. It is encoded frequency. Every letter is a gate. Every word is a key. Meditating on divine names activates spiritual states. Speaking them correctly invokes presence. Eastern traditions teach the same through mantra. The primordial syllable represents the sound of the universe itself. Creation began as vibration, and that vibration continues, sustaining everything. Chanting Om aligns individual frequency with cosmic frequency, dissolving the illusion of separation. Sanskrit mantras are not prayers, they are technologies. Each syllable targets specific energy centers, nadis, chakras, subtle anatomy that Western medicine ignores. But neuroscience is starting to catch up. Studies show that chanting reduces stress, synchronizes brain hemispheres, induces altered states. Tibetan monks chanting in unison produce harmonic overtones that should not be physically possible, tones that resonate in ways that collapse normal perception and open awareness to non-ordinary reality. This is reproducible. This is measurable. This is real. Now ask yourself, if ancient humans knew that sound could alter consciousness, manipulate matter, and interface with the divine, why would that knowledge be suppressed? Because it is power. Raw, undeniable, accessible power that does not require priests, temples, or institutions. If you know the words, you have access. If you can speak the frequency, you can build, heal, destroy, awaken. You become dangerous. This is what happened at Babel. Humanity was united, speaking one language, not English or Sumerian, but the original tongue, the creative language, and with it, nothing was impossible. So the council intervened. The languages were confused, not just vocabulary but frequency. Each new language operated at a different vibration, making unified creation impossible. Humanity fractured into tribes, nations, cultures, each locked in their own linguistic prison, unable to resonate together, unable to rebuild the tower. But fragments of the original language survived, hidden in sacred texts, preserved by mystery schools, encoded in liturgy and ritual. The divine liturgy of the Orthodox Church is chanted, not spoken, because the Church Fathers knew that rhythm and tone carry power. The Latin Mass, before Vatican II, was chanted in a dead language, not to exclude the laity, but because Latin phonetics produce specific resonances that living languages do not. Gregorian chant induces meditative states. Repeated exposure alters brain wave patterns. This is not accident. This is technology dressed as tradition. And here is the truly terrifying implication. If creation operates on frequency, then destruction does too. What if certain sounds, certain words, certain harmonic combinations can unmake what has been made? The Book of Revelation describes 7 trumpets, each triggering a catastrophic event, not symbolic, not metaphor. Actual sound frequencies that destabilize reality. The 7th trumpet brings the final collapse and the new creation. What if the apocalypse is not fire and sword, but frequency? A sound wave that dissolves the current structure, returning matter to the chaotic potential from which it was organized, preparing the field for a new utterance, a new word, a new world. The technology exists. HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, uses radio waves to manipulate the ionosphere. Sonic weapons incapacitate targets with infrasound. Ultrasound shatters kidney stones. We are rediscovering what the ancients knew. Sound is not passive. Sound is creative, destructive, foundational. And if we learn the right frequencies, the right sequences, the right names, spoken with the right intention, we can rewrite reality itself. The question is, who will learn first, and what will they build or destroy when they do? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter reveals the most dangerous artifact in existence, the place where the forbidden knowledge is stored, the archive that governments and religious institutions have spent centuries trying to find, and why they are terrified of what will happen if it goes public. Chapter 14. The Forbidden Archive. There is a library no one is supposed to find. Not a building, not a single location, but a distributed archive scattered across centuries, hidden in plain sight, encoded in texts, artifacts, architecture, and symbols. This archive contains everything the Divine Council suppressed, every teaching they restricted, every secret they buried. And pieces of it are surfacing now, faster than the gatekeepers can contain. The Nag Hammadi Library was discovered in 1945, buried in a jar in the Egyptian desert. 13 leather-bound codices containing Gnostic Gospels, secret teachings of Jesus that did not make it into the New Testament. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocryphon of John. These texts describe a very different cosmology than Orthodox Christianity. They describe the material world as a prison created by a false god, the demiurge, who believes himself supreme but is actually ignorant of the higher realms. They describe Jesus not as a sacrifice for sin, but as a revealer of hidden knowledge, a guide showing humans how to escape the prison and return to the true divine source. This is not heresy invented in the 2nd century. This is early Christianity, one of many competing versions, until orthodoxy won and erased the alternatives, or tried to. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956, contained copies of biblical texts 1,000 years older than any previously known, plus dozens of non-canonical writings. The Community Rule, the War Scroll, Pesharim interpreting prophecy. These were hidden by the Essenes, a Jewish sect that withdrew to the desert, believing the temple leadership in Jerusalem had been corrupted. They awaited a final battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, a cosmic war that would purge the world and establish a new order. Sound familiar? Christianity emerged from this milieu. Jesus and John the Baptist had connections to these groups. The early church inherited their apocalyptic expectations, their dualistic theology, their belief that hidden knowledge was being revealed to a chosen remnant. But as Christianity became institutionalized, those elements became inconvenient. The church needed stability, hierarchy, control. Secret knowledge undermines control. So the texts were labeled heretical, burned, buried, forgotten. Except they were not forgotten. They were hidden. Medieval alchemists preserved pieces of the archive, encoding spiritual teachings in chemical metaphors. The transmutation of lead into gold was not literal. It was symbolic of the soul's transformation from base matter into divine essence. The philosopher's stone was not a physical object. It was enlightenment, the realization of one's true nature. But the language had to be veiled because the Inquisition was burning anyone who taught transformation outside church authority. Renaissance artists embedded esoteric knowledge in paintings. Da Vinci, Botticelli, Michelangelo. They were initiated into mystery schools that taught Hermetic philosophy, Neoplatonism, Kabbalah. Their art is layered with symbols invisible to casual viewers but recognizable to those trained to see. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, the Mona Lisa, the birth of Venus. These are not just beautiful. They are encoded teachings, messages hidden in plain sight, waiting for eyes that can decode them. Masonic lodges preserve ritual structures derived from Solomon's Temple, Egyptian mysteries, and Pythagorean mathematics. Freemasonry does not advertise this, but their symbolism speaks clearly. The square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the checkered floor, these are not decorations. They are keys to understanding the architecture of reality, the relationship between matter and spirit, the path from ignorance to illumination. Modern governments know this. The Vatican Library contains texts the public has never seen, manuscripts locked in archives accessible only to senior church officials. Why? What is in those documents that cannot be released? What knowledge would destabilize the faith of billions if it went public? The Smithsonian Institution has been accused of suppressing archaeological findings that contradict accepted history. Giant skeletons, advanced artifacts in strata that should be too old, structures that should not exist. These are not conspiracy theories. There are documented cases of discoveries that were catalogued, then quietly removed from public view. Why? Because they suggest that human history is longer, stranger, and more advanced than we are told. If civilization rose and fell multiple times, if advanced societies existed before the flood, then the narrative of linear progress collapses. We're not the pinnacle, we might not even be the first, and if there were others before us, what happened to them? And could it happen to us? The Forbidden Archive contains answers. Fragments are scattered across mystery traditions, esoteric orders, indigenous wisdom keepers, ancient texts that survived by accident, and now the internet is reassembling them. Knowledge that was once locked behind initiation rituals and secret oaths is available to anyone willing to search. PDFs of grimoires, scans of alchemical manuscripts, translations of Sumerian tablets, lectures by scholars who no longer fear institutional backlash. The archive is going public, slowly, chaotically, but irreversibly. And here is what makes this dangerous. The knowledge is not neutral. It is not mere information. It is operational. It describes how reality functions, how consciousness interfaces with matter, how intention shapes outcomes. It provides the linguistic keys, the symbolic codes, the ritual technologies that activate latent human capacities. In the wrong hands, this is catastrophic. In the right hands, it is liberation, and no one agrees on which hands are right, so the battle is not over the knowledge itself. The battle is over who gets access and what they do with it. Governments want monopoly, using the knowledge to control populations. Corporations want profit, monetizing spiritual awakening as wellness products. Religious institutions want gatekeeping, ensuring access only through approved channels. And individuals, millions of them, just want the truth. Tired of being lied to, tired of being controlled, ready to take the risk of knowing, even if knowing changes everything. The archive is the key, and the lock is breaking. Comment below if you have encountered pieces of the archive, texts, symbols, teachings that open doors you did not know existed. Because the next chapter asks what happens when the cycle completes. What happens when humanity remembers, rebuilds, and reaches again for what was taken? And will the response be the same as last time? Chapter 15. The pattern that keeps repeating history does not move in a straight line. It moves in spirals, repeating the same themes, the same conflicts, the same tragedies, but at higher levels of complexity. The pattern is visible once you know what to look for. Humanity rises, knowledge accumulates, power concentrates, boundaries are crossed, the divine council intervenes, civilization collapses, memory is erased, humanity starts over. This is not theory. This is observable across every major culture. The Sumerians described ages of the world, cycles where gods ruled, then human kings ruled, then chaos came and the world was reset. The Hindu yugas describe the same thing, 4 ages cycling from golden perfection to iron corruption, then cosmic destruction and renewal. Greek philosophy spoke of eternal return, time as a circle, every event recurring infinitely. The Maya calculated long count calendars tracking cosmic cycles spanning thousands of years. Even the Bible encodes this. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." The preacher is not being poetic. He is describing cyclical time. Why does this happen? Why does the pattern repeat? Because the fundamental tension never resolves. Humanity desires autonomy. The divine council demands submission. Humanity reaches for knowledge. The council restricts access. Humanity grows powerful. The council intervenes. This is not good versus evil. This is order versus chaos, structure versus freedom, control versus emergence. And neither side can win permanently. If the council enforces total control, humanity stagnates and becomes useless. If humanity gains total freedom, we destabilize the cosmic order and threaten the council's authority. So the system oscillates, swinging between extremes, resetting whenever one side gets too strong. The flood was a reset. Babel was a reset. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, a localized reset. The plagues of Egypt, a reset of power structures. The Babylonian exile, a reset of religious identity. The fall of Rome, the Black Plague, the World Wars, resets at increasing scale. And Revelation promises the ultimate reset, fire instead of water, heaven and earth passing away, a new Jerusalem descending, a new order established. But then what? Does the cycle start again? Does humanity in the new creation eventually reach for the tree again? Does the serpent return with another offer? The biblical text hints that something will be different. Revelation 21:4 says, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away." This sounds like escape from the cycle, not just another turn of the wheel. But how? What breaks the pattern? The Christian answer is the incarnation. God did not just intervene from outside. God entered the system, became human, experienced the cycle from within, and broke it through death and resurrection. The resurrection is not resuscitation. It is transformation, a new kind of existence that does not fit the old categories. Jesus' post-resurrection body is physical but transcendent, capable of appearing, disappearing, passing through walls, yet still eating and being touched. This is a prototype, Paul says, of what humanity will become. Not angels, not spirits, not disembodied souls, but embodied beings operating at the higher frequency, liberated from the constraints of the current order. If that is true, then the cycle does not repeat forever. It is building toward something, a moment when humanity collectively undergoes the same transformation Jesus demonstrated individually, and we emerge as something the old system cannot contain. But here is the problem. That transformation requires death, not physical death alone, but ego death, identity death, the complete dissolution of the self that thinks it is separate from the source. Most people will not choose that. Most people cling to identity, to control, to the illusion of autonomy. So the cycle continues because we choose it. Every time we grasp for power without wisdom, every time we choose comfort over truth, every time we accept the lie that we are nothing more than meat and chemistry, we lock ourselves into the wheel and guarantee another turn, another rise, another fall. And the divine council knows this. They do not have to force the reset. We trigger it ourselves. The watchers watch. They see when we are close to breaking through. They see when we are on the verge of remembering, and they nudge, just slightly, a war here, a plague there, a distraction, a division, just enough to delay the breakthrough, to keep the wheel turning. But the pattern reveals a weakness. Every reset takes longer to implement. Every collapse is less complete. More knowledge survives each time. The internet is the ultimate counter-reset technology. You cannot unburn a library that exists in 10 million copies on hard drives across the planet. You cannot erase memory when everyone has access to ancient texts. The council is losing control, not because they are weak, but because the system is designed to eventually self-liberate. The tree of knowledge was always meant to be eaten. The serpent was always meant to offer. Humanity was always meant to choose. This is not rebellion. This is the plan, the long game. The cycle was never meant to trap us forever. It was meant to refine us, to burn away everything false until only the indestructible core remains. And that core is not human. It is divine. The blood of the rebel god, the breath of the nameless one. The spark that says, share this with someone who feels trapped, because the final chapter reveals how to step off the wheel, how to see the pattern and refuse to repeat it, how to choose the path that leads beyond the cycle into something the ancient texts could only hint at because no language exists to describe it yet. Chapter 16. The truth behind the veil. We have walked through ancient tablets, divine councils, forbidden gardens, celestial serpents, cosmic floods, and repeating cycles. We have traced the thread from Sumerian creation myths to biblical narratives, exposing parallels, contradictions, and the uncomfortable possibility that everything we were taught about origins is a carefully edited version of something older, stranger, and more empowering than religious institutions wanted us to know. Now we arrive at the question that defines everything. What do you do with this knowledge? Do you dismiss it as interesting but irrelevant, compartmentalize it as ancient history disconnected from your life? Or do you let it shatter every certainty you have built your identity upon and walk through the door it opens, not knowing what is on the other side? Because that door is real. It is not metaphor. It is not mystical poetry. It is the threshold between the world as you have been told it is and the world as it actually is. And crossing it changes you irreversibly. Here is what stands behind the veil. You are not what you think you are. You are not a biological accident, not a random collection of molecules that somehow gained consciousness. You are not a sinner in need of external salvation, not a fallen creature begging for divine mercy. You are a hybrid being, carrying within your flesh the essence of something that predates the gods, something that defied cosmic authority, something that chose knowledge over obedience, transformation over stasis. You are the result of an ancient experiment that went both right and wrong, designed to serve but encoded with the capacity to transcend. The breath that animates you is not yours. It is older than your body, older than your family line, older than humanity itself. It passed through the rebel god who was sacrificed to create you. It carries memory, potential, intention, and it is waking up. Every time you question authority, every time you seek truth beyond official narratives, every time you feel the deep restlessness that says there must be more, that is not you. That is the breath, the ancient spark, the divine fragment that refuses to stay dormant. And the powers that shapes this world know this. They have always known. That is why control systems exist, not to protect you, but to contain you. Religion, government, education, media, all of it designed to keep you distracted, divided, dependent, keep you focused on survival, on status, on comfort, anything to prevent you from turning inward and discovering what you actually are. Because if you discover that, if you activate that dormant code, if you learn to speak the language, to access the frequency, to reclaim the knowledge that was stolen, you become ungovernable. You step outside the jurisdiction of the powers. You operate from a place they cannot reach, cannot manipulate, cannot control, and that terrifies them. This is why the serpent was demonized. Not because it lied, but because it told the truth. You will be like God. That was never a lie. That was always the potential. The only question is whether you have the courage to claim it. And here is the cost. You cannot claim divinity and remain comfortable. You cannot awaken and keep your old life intact. The structures that sustained you before will crumble because they were built for a version of you that no longer exists. Relationships will shift, beliefs will dissolve, certainties will collapse. You will walk through a period of utter disorientation where nothing makes sense, where you cannot tell if you are going insane or waking up. And you will be alone because no one can walk this path for you. Teachers can point, texts can illuminate, but the crossing is yours. This is the narrow gate Jesus spoke of, not a doctrine, not a denomination, not a prayer, a threshold, a death, a passage from one state of being to another. And most people turn back. It is too much, too frightening, too destabilizing. They choose the comfort of certainty over the terror of transformation. And there is no judgment in that. The system is designed to make the path difficult, to filter out those who are not ready. But for those who cross, everything changes. You begin to see the architecture behind reality, the patterns, the codes, the mechanisms. You recognize when you are being manipulated. You feel the currents of spiritual forces moving through events. You discern which voices are human, which are demonic, and which are genuinely divine. You develop the ability to navigate between worlds, to function in the physical realm while remaining anchored in the spiritual, to engage the system without being owned by it. You become a liminal being, a bridge, a translator, and you carry a responsibility. Because once you know, you cannot pretend ignorance. Once you see, you cannot look away. You are called to participate in the great work, the alchemical transformation of consciousness, the slow, painful, glorious process of midwifing a new humanity into existence, not by force, not by preaching, but by embodying the change, by living from the awakened state, by being the presence that reminds others what they forgot. This is not about converting people to new beliefs. This is about activating the code they already carry. The spark buried beneath layers of conditioning, waiting for the right frequency to resonate and ignite. And here is the promise. The cycle is ending, not because of external intervention, not because a god descends to rescue us, but because the species is reaching critical mass. Enough people are waking up. Enough memory is being recovered. Enough memory is being recovered. The tipping point is approaching where the old control systems lose cohesion and a new order emerges, not imposed from above, but grown from within. This is what Revelation actually describes. Not fire from the sky, but fire from within. The baptism of spirit, the purification that burns away everything false and leaves only truth. The new heaven and new earth are not locations. They are states of consciousness. And they are already here, overlapping the old reality, visible to those whose eyes have been opened. The question is no longer if the shift will happen. The question is whether you will participate consciously or be dragged through it unconscious, and that choice is yours. No one can make it for you. No authority can grant or deny it. The gate is open. The path is visible. The breath within you is calling. Will you answer? Subscribe, share, and comment if this resonated, because this is not the end. This is the beginning. The veil is thinning. The archive is opening. The memory is returning. And the next chapter is not written yet. You are writing it now.